Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We take stacks of research articles, sources, and we boil it all down to get you the essential insights fast.
That's the goal.
Today we're tackling a really big one, a deep dive into one of the 20th century's most complex and frankly fiercely debated conflicts, the Spanish Civil War.
Absolutely. It's one of those conflicts that, everyone's heard of, but the details often get lost or, well, oversimplified.
Exactly. You might think of it as just, distant history. But as we're going to unpack today, the core clashes, these fundamental disagreements about society, about faith, about how a country should be run, they really echo challenges we're still facing today.
They absolutely do. And so much of the common narrative, especially around figures like Franco or the Republican government, was shaped, really heavily shaped, by the winning narratives afterwards.
Right. And it's important for us to say right at the top that the historical accounts we're drawing on for this deep dive, they definitely lean towards certain viewpoints. They particularly emphasize the nationalist perspective and the really shocking religious persecution that occurred.
Yes, that comes through very strongly in the material we reviewed. Our job here isn't to endorse any political side, obviously.
No, absolutely not. Our mission is just to clearly convey the information and the perspectives within these specific sources.
Exactly. We want to look beyond the simple stories and, understand the really tangled realities that led Spain to just, well, erupt in 1936.
So think of this as your shortcut to getting your head around a truly pivotal moment. Our mission for you, the listener, is to uncover the real causes, look at the surprising range of people involved, analyze the complex internal stuff, the external factors too.
The big ideological battles, the persecution of the church, which, as you said, is heavily detailed in our sources.
And then trace how it all ended. We're sticking strictly to the historical accounts provided to tell this story. And it's a story that really goes back centuries. Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it. Where do we start? Centuries back, you said.
Yeah, we really have to. Because Spain in the early 1900s, it's such a stark contrast to, say, the 16th century, right? When it was this global superpower, arguably the biggest empire the world had seen.
Unbelievable power back then.
But fast forward to the early 20th century, and, well, many observers were calling it backwards, just lagging behind in almost every way. The 19th century had been particularly rough.
Brutal is the word.
The Napoleonic Wars. Spain was just a horrific war zone for, half a decade?
And the sources we have really stress what that left behind. Not just destruction, but what many traditional Spaniards saw as the moral scourge of liberalism.
Explain that a bit. What did they mean by liberalism in that context?
Well, it was those new Enlightenment ideas, individual rights, getting rid of the monarchy or limiting it, secular government, constitutions, all things that just clashed head-on with Spain's super traditional, deeply Catholic identity.
And apparently the British liberators weren't exactly angels either.
No, the account suggests they weren't always well-behaved, let's say, added to the instability.
Right, so that's the external shock, but you mentioned internal decay, too.
Oh, massively. Losing the American empire, piece by piece over decades. That was economically catastrophic, obviously, but also a huge psychological blow.
Yeah, losing an empire.
And then capped off by that humiliating defeat in the Spanish-American War end of the 19th century. The sources blame a horribly supplied army. Just buried the last ghost of that global power.
And Spain just couldn't cope with being, well, not top dog anymore.
It seems that way. Unlike other European nations that adapted, Spain really struggled, according to these accounts, to accept its diminished status. And that resistance made it really hard to embrace modernity, the Industrial Revolution, all the stuff changing the rest of Europe.
And that stagnation just made the internal divides worse, right? You had places like Catalonia booming.
Yeah, industrial centers, trade, factories, Catalonia's taking off.
While the rest of the country, the vast interior, was just wilting.
Pretty much. And the sources paint an incredible picture of this. An English traveler mentioning Leon, a city kept in existence by the church.
Kept in existence. Wow.
Seriously. In the early 1800s in Valladolid, 20% of the people survived only on church charity.
That's staggering.
And in Madrid, convents were apparently dishing out 30,000 bowls of soup daily. You have to remember, Spain was, for a very long time, arguably Europe's most religious country. The church was literally keeping parts of the population afloat. People, the government, and modernization had seemingly forgotten.
So the church wasn't just spiritual. It was a massive social and economic force.
Absolutely fundamental. Even someone like the Duke of Wellington. During the war against Napoleon, he admitted it. He said, this is a quote from the sources, "The real power in Spain is in the clergy. They kept the people right against France.
So even the anti-clerical liberals had to admit the church had more sway.
They had to. Grudgingly, perhaps. Whatever the church told people carried way more weight than anything the politicians or guerrilla leaders said. The French had tried to stamp out the church during the occupation.
And when they left?
The Spanish liberals, inspired by French ideas, kind of wanted to carry on that suppression. But in the really devout areas, people just enthusiastically rebuilt the monasteries. It wasn't just politics.
No, it sounds deeper.
The sources frame it as a mortal enemy struggle. The church, representing tradition, versus liberalism, representing secularism, individualism. And this fight, this deep, deep divide, is presented as maybe the single biggest factor leading, eventually, over a century later, to the Civil War.
Okay, so that sets a pretty grim long-term stage.
Yeah.
But then there was this brief pause, right? An interlude of order.
Yeah, quite unexpected. After more than a century of this grinding decline and infighting, you get this period under General Primo de Rivera from 1923 to 1930.
What brought him in?
Well, by 1923, Spain was just drowning in what people saw as corruption, decay, and political violence. Total mess. The army itself was riddled with corruption.
Ironically, the army then provides the solution.
Kind of, yeah. Primo de Rivera stages a bloodless coup. And there's this English businessman, Arthur F. Loveday, who lived there and wrote about it. He paints this stark picture of Spain before 1923.
What did he say?
He wrote, "Law and order were continually being flouted. Terrorism was rife. Gunmen was almost completely in control. Public finances were in a state of chaos. Railways were disorganized. No roads fit for automobiles. Public buildings in a ruinous state." Just sounds like total anarchy.
Wow. So Primo comes in and
Turns things around dramatically. According to Loveday, he details the successes. Law and order were reestablished and maintained without bloodshed. Industry became more tranquil and prosperous than ever.
what about that costly war in Morocco?
Brought to a satisfactory end for Spain and with prestige to her arms. Finances sorted out, budget surpluses achieved, railways improved massively, equal to the best roads anywhere in Europe, Loveday claimed.
So on paper, a huge success. He saved the country from the brink.
Pretty much, yeah. A period of stability Spain hadn't seen in generations.
But it didn't last. Why did he fall? He sounds like he's doing a good job.
Well, the sources describe him as politically naive. Despite the domestic success, he just couldn't seem to handle the exiled agitators, the constant plotting from outside.
And the sources mention Soviet help for these agitators.
Yeah, they highlight that these groups were aided every step of the way by the Soviets, aiming to destabilize things. Plus, Primo apparently fell foul of international finance. There's speculation these powerful groups deliberately weakened the Spanish currency to help bring him down.
Even while the country itself was doing okay, despite the coming global depression.
Exactly. It suggests external forces were really playing a big role behind the scenes.
And then there were the internal tensions that didn't go away, right? The regional stuff.
Ah, yes. The Catalan problem, as it was known, and the Basque issue too, though maybe less intense. These have been simmering for centuries.
What was the core issue there?
Well, from the Catalan perspective, many felt they had a distinct culture, language, identity, and wanted autonomy or even independence. Historical grievances played a part.
But from the perspective of, say, Castile.
They often saw it as just political troublemaking. They'd point out that Catalonia and Castile had been united for like 500 years, built an empire together. But in the last couple of centuries, things got really heated. Lots of extremism and violence, particularly in Catalonia.
And the Basques?
Similar issues, but the sources say it was far less heated. Many Basques were actually staunch Carlists, traditionalist, Catholic, monarchists. So a different dynamic.
So these regional tensions, plus the political naivety, the external pressures, it all meant that once Primo was gone.
Things unraveled incredibly fast. Set the stage directly for the chaos of the 1930s and the war itself in 36.
Okay, so Primo's out. What happens immediately after?
Boom. Just 2 months later, a general amnesty. All those exiled agitators, many with very radical ideas, come flooding back.
And the result?
Instant chaos, basically. Riots, strikes, protests. The economy just collapses, undoing years of Primo's work in, like, a single year. It got so bad, King Alfonso and his family fled to Paris.
Did he abdicate?
No, interestingly. He refused to formally abdicate. Said he left only to prevent a civil war and would return if the people wanted him. But his departure left a vacuum.
And into the vacuum steps.
A republic. Swiftly established, led by radical socialists and a coalition of other leftist parties, the Second Republic begins. And this new government was controversial from the get-go, right, for a lot of people.
Yeah, our sources really emphasize that. They talk about its unholy alliance with what they considered the most extreme and subversive elements.
Like who?
Groups like the FAI, the Iberian Anarchist Federation, and the Sindicarta Unico, which was an anarchist trade union, plus extreme separatists from Catalonia.
Not exactly a mainstream partner.
Not at all. And the government itself raised eyebrows. The sources point out 8 of the 11 original Republican leaders were Freemasons.
Why was that such a big deal in Spain?
Well, for devout Catholics, Freemasonry was often seen as anti-clerical, pushing secular Enlightenment values, kind of a secret society challenging the church. In an overwhelmingly Catholic country, that was perceived by many as a mortal sin and a direct threat.
Okay, I see. And they made some symbolic moves early on, too.
Yeah, one of the first things they did was cancel the 15th century decree expelling the Jews, a decree that wasn't even really enforced anymore.
So why do it?
Good question. Maybe a signal of a new era. But it backfired in some circles, leading to criticism and accusations of Jewish elements of international communism having influence, highly charged stuff.
Wow. So symbolic moves, controversial alliances. What about actual policies?
Well, ironically, the way they passed their early decrees is described in our sources as more dictatorial than Primo de Rivera himself.
Really? More dictatorial than the dictator?
That's how Loveday puts it. He lists some really alarming measures. First, the religious stuff. Complete secularization of education, confiscation of all religious and church properties, expulsion of the Jesuits, and the cutting off of the salaries of the parish priests.
Okay, that's huge. How did that go down?
Terribly for the Catholic majority. It was seen flat out as persecution of Christianity. It deprived parents of what they considered the only good education, and combined with churches being burned while police watched. Well, it looked like a state-sponsored attack on faith.
What else? Any economic changes?
Oh, yeah, an agrarian law. Based on, as the sources say, the Marxist doctrine that the land belongs to the peasant, so confiscation of large estates.
Did that work? Did the peasants farm the land?
Often not, apparently. The sources say the lands frequently ceased to be worked at all. Peasants maybe lacked the tools or capital, or sometimes in anger they killed the cattle and burnt the crops. Chaos.
And the Catalan issue.
They granted Catalonia a statute of autonomy. Our sources are pretty blunt, calling it the price paid by the socialist government for the support of the Catalan deputies. A political deal.
So a whole raft of really radical changes pushed through quickly. When did they actually hold an election?
Not until June 1933, after all this had happened, and the result, a complete bloodbath for the socialists, according to the sources. They lost massively.
Who won?
The right ended up with 210 seats, the center 170, the left just 100, a clear rejection of the government's direction by the voters at that time.
So the new right-center government starts rolling back the anti-church laws.
Exactly. Slowly, but they start. And that prompts the socialists to vow violent revolution, to overthrow the Constitution and seize power back. They started openly working with anarchists and extremists.
Which led to
The botched revolution in October 1934. You had Asturian miners taking a lead role, lots of violence.
And Franco's involved in putting this down.
Yes, he was one of the generals called in. They suppressed it fairly easily. But the revolutionaries caused a lot of damage, trashed buildings, libraries, convents. A huge arms cache was even found at the Socialist HQ in Madrid. Pretty clear intentions.
Were the leaders prosecuted?
Barely. The sources call the prosecution a farce. Trials dragged. Key figures like Manuel Lozano were just let go. This really disgusted many in the army.
And then the international spin machine starts, trying to make the revolutionaries look like victims.
Exactly. Stories spread that they weren't armed or were just reacting to oppression. And apparently these narratives gained traction abroad, like in Britain. The British Labour Party even pressured the Spanish government to be lenient.
So the right wins the election, but then seems weak in dealing with the aftermath.
That's the criticism from,
Yeah.
José Antonio Primo de Rivera, the dictator's son. He complained in 1935 that the right had just sat back, hadn't offered a strong alternative, just let the revolutionary spirit simmer. A missed opportunity, in his view. Which sets the stage for the next election, February 1936. And this one was problematic.
Hugely problematic. Deeply contested. Like echo chamber of modern controversies kind of contested.
How so? What were the issues?
Well, the official government figures actually showed the right and center parties got more votes overall, about 454,000 more than the left-wing Popular Front.
Okay, so the right center won the popular vote.
According to the government's own numbers, yes. And this was despite widespread reports of irregularities favoring the Popular Front mobs, destroying ballot boxes, faking results in some areas.
But the Popular Front ended up with more seats in Parliament.
Exactly. Somehow they convened with 256 deputies to the right center's 217, a 39-seat majority, which already seemed fishy given the vote count and the electoral system. But many argued the proven fraud should have just invalidated the whole thing.
But they didn't stop there. The Popular Front wanted a bigger majority.
Apparently so. The sources describe them using an entirely new parliamentary procedure, basically just voting by simple majority to kick out their political opponents, annul their mandates.
Just vote them out of Parliament?
Yeah, described as highly unconstitutional and undemocratic. But it worked. They boosted their majority to 118 seats this way.
What did people say about this at the time?
President Zamora, who'd been a Republican initially but got pushed out, he wrote later that the Popular Front did not secure a majority legally, but got it by basically ignoring the rules and any sense of fairness.
And historians back this up. What does someone like Stanley Payne say? Payne details how leftist crowds interfered with voting, broke into prisons to free revolutionaries during the election process, destroyed results in some areas, forced repeat elections that the Popular Front then swept under duress.
So intimidation and chaos at the polls.
Massive pressure. Payne says provincial governors and assembly presidents just resigned in fear, abandoning the count before it was even finished. The sources also say the leftist government was so embarrassed by their own official results showing a right-wing popular victory, they refused to publish them.
So what do historians think the real result was without the meddling?
Well, one historian cited, Roberto Villa Garcia, concluded it was likely 51% for the right, 44% for the left. A clear conservative win, basically stolen.
And then it gets even more blatant, redistributing seats.
Yeah, in March, an electoral commission set up by the leftists literally started reassigning seats to themselves, according to our sources, under false pretenses. Elections in conservative provinces like Granada and Cuenca were just annulled.
Annulled. Just canceled.
Yep. Then they held new elections there in May, but right-wing candidates were effectively prevented from running through extreme coercion. And surprise, surprise, those provinces suddenly became Popular Front victories.
So they just kept manipulating things until they had enough power.
Pretty much. Enough power to even change the Constitution. But while they grabbed power this way, the sources argue they completely lost the trust of the people. The corruption, the illegal moves. It was all pretty obvious to many. For a huge chunk of the country, especially Catholics, it just confirmed their worst fears about where the country was headed. So, new government under Azana, the guy just acquitted for the 34 revolution, takes power. What happens next?
Immediate reversal of the previous government's reforms, and then an explosion of violence. State-sanctioned, or at least state-tolerated violence, according to our sources.
Like what kind of violence?
Within 3 months, 300 churches were burned, along with lots of other buildings. Police and civil guards were reportedly simply ordered to stand down. Strikes everywhere. Government always siding with the strikers.
What did that mean for businesses?
Employers were basically forced to give in. If they couldn't afford the demands, they couldn't close down. They had to either hand the business over to the strikers or go to prison. It was nuts.
And the 1934 revolutionaries.
Full amnesty declared in March 36. For many, this just cemented the government's far-left agenda. It looked like the country was sliding into, well, what they saw as atheistic communist anarchy, and the prisons didn't stay empty for long.
Nope. They started filling up again, but this time with people who spoke out for a more traditional Christian Spain. The main target, the Falange.
That's José Antonio Primo de Rivera's group, son of the dictator.
Yeah, a nationalist, patriotic Christian movement. Small but growing fast as people got fed up with the mainstream right. The Falange were one of the few groups actively fighting back against the violence, according to these accounts.
But it was an uneven fight.
Completely. Sources say communists could seemingly murder Phalangists with impunity. No raids, no investigations, nothing.
Yeah.
But if a communist got hurt, immediate crackdown on the Falange, buildings raided, leaders arrested, impossible fines.
So one rule for the left, another for the right.
That's the picture painted. One quote sums it up. The left were let off the hook for essentially anything, while the right would just be collectively punished for everything down to the tiniest infraction. The bias seemed blatant. Violence kept rising, discontent grew, even the army and civil guards were being attacked. And behind it all, plots were brewing.
It really sounds like a tinderbox. What was the final spark?
The murder of Calvo Sotto, July 15, 1936. He was a leading conservative politician, a real figurehead for many patriots.
What happened to him?
Kidnapped from his home by police officers, actual police, and then brutally murdered in their van by the police themselves. According to the accounts, yes, a horrifically short-sighted act. It instantly turned Sotelo into the biggest martyr for the nationalist cause, a rallying cry, the first of many martyrs, sadly. And this connects back to that core ideological clash you mentioned earlier.
Absolutely. Arthur Loveday put it bluntly. At the core of the conflict was the struggle between those who held the doctrines of Karl Marx and those who held the doctrines of Christ. He argued there was just no reconciliation possible. Sotelo's murder, for him, set the light to the Civil War.
So the military rising wasn't a complete surprise. People saw something coming.
Oh yeah, for anyone paying attention, it seemed almost inevitable. Back in June, weeks before it kicked off, a document was apparently captured.
A document detailing what?
A communist plan, according to our sources, for another revolution this time against the existing far-left Republican government, aiming to set up a Soviet-style state under Largo Caballero. And its authenticity was supposedly confirmed later, so the threat felt very real and immediate.
And you could see signs of this brewing on the ground.
Definitely. Loveday toured Spain in June 36, just before it all exploded. He described complete disorder, life and property unsafe, people being robbed by men in red shirts, cities scarred by destroyed churches, universal strikes.
What else did he see?
The red flag, sickle and hammer, international pictures of Stalin, Lenin, and Dimitrov protruded themselves on all sides. Bookstores full of communist, pornographic, and anti-Christian literature. It painted a picture of a society already in revolutionary upheaval.
And armed groups preparing.
Yes, perhaps more significant, Loveday writes, were the Red Militia to be found drilling in many parts of Spain. Openly communist or anarchist, wearing red shirts, preparing for the coming communist rising.
And the government knew about this. Armed them. The sources claim they were armed, if not by the government itself, at all events with their connivance. No effort was made to disarm them. Meanwhile, army officers faced constant hostility from mobs, seemingly with government backing. The whole country felt broken.
And the church situation was still dire.
Absolutely. Church burnings, clergy murders were commonplace, even encouraged by some officials, according to these accounts. The Vatican had apparently offered a compromise, an American-style separation of church and state, but it was rejected. By July 36, religious services were suppressed, Jesuits expelled, Catholic schools shut or burned. The revolution wasn't just coming. It felt like it had been underway for 5 years already.
So for patriotic Catholic Spaniards, it felt like the walls were closing in.
Completely. By July, 5% of landed property had been confiscated, often illegally by extremists, with the government doing nothing, or even legitimizing it afterwards. Parts of Spain were essentially under communist control, land redistributed.
What about landowners who kept their property?
Huge problems. Rural labor costs had shot up 50–60% due to new laws, forcing many to just abandon their farms. It felt, as one source put it, as if children had taken over the government. Just chaos and incompetence. Lawlessness varied, but it was widespread.
And politically.
The new parliament's first big move was sacking President Zamora for protesting decrees that forced businesses to rehire and compensate workers involved in the 34 communist revolt, even the violent ones. Revolutionaries were put in charge of police forces. Government officials openly bragged about arresting priests. Azana, the president, basically dared opponents, saying violence was just part of the Spanish character. Wow. Blaming the violence on the national character.
Yeah, Payne highlights Azana threatening the law-abiding CETA party in Parliament, telling them to just take the violence. He tried to soften it later, but still blamed the Spanish character, deflecting responsibility. By July, the violence was insane.
And the crackdown was still one-sided, completely, according to the sources. Only phalangists were punished for retaliating. Leftists initiating violence were ignored. One phalangist sympathizer kidnapped, stabbed 33 times nothing. Another tortured and shot. The government responds by arresting 300 other phalangists and tightening censorship.
So the murderers were basically protected.
It certainly looked that way. Any pretense of reconciliation was gone. The government seemed to be pushing the right towards total surrender or revolt. It was explosive.
So someone had to organize the inevitable military response. Who stepped up?
General Emilio Mola, a veteran of the Moroccan Wars. The government had exiled him to Pamplona, thinking he was out of the way.
Bad move.
Terrible move. He immediately won over the local garrison. He became the key organizer for the planned revolt. The idea was that General Sanjuro, in exile in Portugal, would take overall command if it succeeded.
But not everyone was immediately on board. Franco, for example.
Right. Many generals were hesitant. Failure meant execution. Franco, according to Payne, only committed when they judged that it would literally be more dangerous not to rebel than to rebel. That point only came in mid-July. The whole conspiracy was actually pretty shaky, poorly organized initially.
So what solidified it? What made them all jump up?
Calvo Sotelo's murder. That was the absolute catalyst, our sources confirm. Hours after hearing the news, Franco sends a message to Mola. I'm all in. 2 days later, the Carlist leaders in the north pledged their forces.
And then it begins?
July 17th. The Army of Africa in Morocco, the elite troops, they rise up first. The government loses control there immediately, admits Morocco is lost, and relies on the Navy to blockade the Straits of Gibraltar.
So the best troops are trapped in Africa?
Initially, yes. Meanwhile, garrisons rise up across mainland Spain. Some succeed, capturing areas, others fail disastrously. After a few days, about a third of the country is in rebel hands, mostly the conservative north, plus a pocket around Seville and Cadiz in the south.
So it didn't look like a guaranteed success?
Not at all. To outsiders, it probably looked like it had failed. Only 4 major generals joined initially. The government held 5 of the 7 biggest cities, most of the industry, most of the weapons, and crucially, Spain's massive gold reserves, 4th largest in the world.
And the government started arming militias?
Yes, arming the far-left militias to boost their numbers. A decision our sources suggest had a massive, unforeseen downside: unleashing total disorder in their own territory.
And that disorder kicked in immediately?
Instantly. The Republican zone descended into complete unruliness and mass violent revolution, as the sources describe it.
Payne points out a paradox here, right?
A huge one. He writes, the insurgents struck preemptively before a full revolution broke out, but the government's response was to empower that very revolution across 2/3 of Spain.
And a consequence of empowering that revolution.
This is fascinating. Payne argues the revolution helped save the insurgent cause. Why? Because its focus on atrocity and pillage diverted energy from fighting the war, and the sheer horror of it swung the sympathies of most of the middle and lower middle classes and nearly all of Catholic society to side with the insurgents, giving them vital mass support.
So the Republicans' own actions inadvertently helped Franco.
That's the argument presented here, a profound tragic irony.
Okay, so let's look at the forces themselves. The Republican military, how effective was it early on?
Well, it was hampered from the start by internal politics. Following a plan by Largo Caballero, the government officially dissolved all the rebellious army units, which obviously didn't affect the rebels.
But it affected the loyal units.
Massively. It only weakened discipline in loyal units. Many loyal units were viewed with such suspicion they were also dissolved. So in the first weeks, the Republic had maybe only 10,000 organized troops left.
10,000? That's tiny. So they relied on militias.
Yeah, hastily formed combat columns from army remnants, guards, and new volunteer militias. But these were inexperienced, untrained, poorly commanded, and weakly disciplined.
But they were paid well.
Ironically, yes. Most highly paid infantry in the world at the time, apparently. But Payne notes they generally lacked cohesion. Money doesn't buy fighting spirit or discipline.
How did the rebel militias compare?
Often much more effective initially, for different reasons. Take the Carlos Riquetés in the north, 20,000 strong.
Who were they exactly?
Devout traditionalist Catholics. Described as extremely disciplined, determined, and combat-ready. They've basically been preparing for this kind of holy war for generations. Colonel Reed described them fighting, quote, with faith in victory, with faith in God, one hand holding a grenade, the other a rosary.
Wow, that's intense. Any other groups?
Peter Kemp, an English volunteer with the Nationalists, remembered a priest literally shouting at him during battle to kill more of the atheist rabble. And the Phalangist militia also grew rapidly, matching the revolutionary numbers, though their effectiveness varied more.
So the north is relatively secure for the rebels, but the key is Franco and his Army of Africa stuck in Morocco. How did they get across?
This was the critical early challenge. The day after the rising, Franco gets to Morocco from the Canaries thanks to a private English plane, interestingly.
But the Republican Navy is blockading the strait.
Initially, yes, only about 700 troops got across before the blockade tightened. And then General Sanjurio, the plant leader, dies in a plane crash on July 20th.
Making Franco even more important.
Absolutely. He immediately sends people to Germany and Italy asking for help.
Yeah.
They agree quickly, sending planes and weapons. Most crucially, German Junker transport planes to airlift the Army of Africa.
What about the Republican Navy? Why didn't they stop the airlift?
Riddled with mutinies. Revolutionary sailors had executed or thrown their officers overboard. The fleet was described as completely inept at maintaining the blockade.
So Franco's gamble worked.
Amazingly well. By the end of September, 16,000 elite troops were airlifted across. And more volunteers, many of them Moroccan, were flocking to join him. So Franco, known for being cautious, takes this huge risk.
He felt he had to, and it paid off massively. He starts the March on Madrid in early August, quickly becomes recognized as the top rebel general, and soon their supreme leader.
But he wasn't just rushing to Madrid.
No, he was also consolidating, building up administration in the south, linking up isolated pockets like Granada, and crucially creating a land bridge to connect with Molla's forces in the north who were running low on ammo. That dual-focus advance and consolidate was typical Franco. Payne describes his style as very methodical, right? Focusing on logistics.
Exactly. Careful logistics and methodical advance, shoring up flanks. The old saying, amateurs talk strategy, professionals talk logistics. Franco was definitely a logistics guy. Sometimes criticized for lacking strategic flair, maybe, but intensely focused on the practicalities.
Unlike the Russian Civil War, with its huge, chaotic swings.
Right. Franco seemed determined to avoid that. He never had to order a full strategic retreat during the entire war. His Army of Africa units just chewed up the larger, less disciplined Republican militias. Flanking maneuvers often sent them running. They took Talavera, just 120 kilometers from Madrid by early September, panic in the capital.
And then he diverts to Toledo. The Alcazar siege.
Yeah, a controversial move militarily, maybe delaying the Madrid attack, but symbolically huge. A small group of nationalists holding out against overwhelming odds in this ancient fortress. It became an international sensation.
And intensely religious for the defenders.
Absolutely. Our sources describe a statue of Charles V miraculously deflecting a shell seen as a sign from God. They turned tunnels into chapels. Incredible stories of faith and endurance, even children being born during the siege.
What did the Republicans make of it?
Anarchist leader John Garcia Oliver apparently lamented their tenacity, saying fascist-held towns resist fiercely, while we do not resist at all. It highlighted a perceived difference in resolve, according to our sources.
And that famous story about the commander's son.
General Moscardo. His son was captured, threatened with death, unless the Alcázar surrendered. Moscardo supposedly told him over the phone, "Commend your soul to God and die like a patriot." His son replied, "That I can do." Just incredible determination. Franco liberates the Alcázar, big morale boost, and then resumes the March on Madrid by mid-October.
But by then, the Republicans had regrouped and got outside help.
Yes, they announced a new, centralized People's Army. And crucially, Soviet aid started flooding in. T-26 tanks, way better than Franco's, and thousands of communist volunteers in the international brigades, plus Soviet planes and pilots.
So when Franco attacks Madrid in November,
he's outnumbered and outgunned. Maybe 20,000 attackers against 40,000 defenders with superior firepower. He gets a foothold on the edge, but can't break through. The new People's Army, like the militias, wasn't great on offense, but could defend fixed positions. Franco's taking heavy casualties. Soviet planes dominate the sky for the first time.
So the quick victory plan is dead.
Completely dead. Payne calls the battle for Madrid a turning point. The fall of the capital might have ended it, but it held. From then on, both sides knew they were in for a long, grueling conflict, building massive armies.
Franco's army boosted by Italians, Republicans by the international brigades.
Yep. Franco tries to encircle Madrid. Costly battles. The Italians suffer a setback at Guadalajara, big propaganda win for the Republicans. After that, Franco finally listens to advice and shifts his main effort to the industrial north.
And this marks a new phase, but while the nationalists are consolidating, what's happening behind Republican lines? Still chaos.
Total chaos, according to our sources. This is crucial. While the world saw a conventional war, Payne writes that in the Republican zone, the revolution, rather than the war, drew the main attention of the workers' movement.
So they were more focused on social revolution than fighting Franco?
Largely, yes. Payne says most of their fellows dedicated themselves to seizure of economic facilities, large-scale pillage, arson, and massive violence against civilians, a massive diversion of energy from the actual war effort.
And this wasn't just fringe elements. Leaders acknowledged it.
Some did. Internally, at least. Horacio Prieto, a top anarchist leader, later admitted, "We proceeded immediately to dictatorship, even faster than the Bolsheviks," he claimed. Andrew Nin of the PUM, Trotskyists, said Spain's revolution was more profound than Russia's.
Even supporters of the Republic described the chaos.
Yes, Clara Campoamor, a women's rights advocate, wrote about Madrid's invasion of ugliness and the moral misery of people just trying to survive. These are voices from within the Republican side describing profound upheaval.
But internationally, they kept this quiet, the great camouflage.
Exactly. Burnett Bulletin called it that. For foreign consumption, the Republic denied the revolution existed. They presented themselves as a normal parliamentary democracy to win support from Western nations who'd be wary of backing a communist revolution. The revolution that dares not speak its own name. While in the nationalist zone, complete contrast, according to observers. Catholics rejoicing, crucifixes back in schools, absolutely overwhelming church attendance rates, a massive religious revival. This popular support meant Franco barely needed to guard his supply lines like a normal army would. That difference in internal order was huge.
Okay, let's talk about that internal order or lack of it. The Red Terror in the Republican zone. How bad was it, according to these sources?
Truly horrifying, based on these accounts. Ernest Nolt's description is chilling. Chaos and Bolshevik terror. Armed mobs, executions, anarchist atrocities, mummies of nuns dragged from their tombs and placed for exhibit, expropriations, forced collectivization. You can see why they tried to hide it internationally.
When did the execution start?
Almost immediately. First recorded in Madrid, July 19th. Soon, leftist parties formed death squads, Chekas, named after the Soviet terror apparatus. Official police often participated, and newspapers openly praised the killings.
How did this compare to repression on the nationalist side?
The sources argue nationalist repression, while also brutal and extensive, especially later, was far less prominent during the war itself because of their popular support. It was also supposedly more targeted at political activists rather than symbolic class enemies like landowners or clergy, though obviously still devastating for those targeted.
Where were the worst killings in the Republican zone?
Madrid saw the most, maybe 10,000. November 36 alone saw 2,500 executions ordered, including José Antonio Primo de Rivera, his body dumped in pits near Paracuellos de Jarama. And there was an attempt to cover this up internationally.
Yes, a chilling incident where Soviet pilots allegedly shot down an international Red Cross plane carrying a doctor with a detailed dossier photos, data on the repression, destroyed the evidence. The sources called the anti-clerical violence a potential genocide.
Yes, arguing that if clergy were an ethnic group, the scale and systematic nature would qualify. They state the clergy was the only social sector marked out for extermination as such by revolutionaries in the Republican zone.
What about the justification that the church was tyrannical?
The sources flatly reject this. Church and state had been separated for 5 years. The church had lost most economic power. It was in dire straits financially. The real reason, they argue, was that Catholicism was the spiritual head of the traditional order. So revolutionaries wanted to crush it root and branch, a basically defenseless target.
This wasn't the first wave of anti-church violence, but it was the worst.
By far. Major church burnings happened in 1909, 1931, early 36. But summer 36 onwards was unprecedented. Compared it to the French Revolution, maybe 2,000 clergy killed then, despite the French church being much more powerful. In Spain, over 3 times that number.
Give us the final numbers from the sources again.
It's horrific. 4,022 secular priests, 2,376 monks and friars, 282 nuns, 95 seminarians, 12 bishops, 1 apostolic administrator, total. 6,788 clergy killed. That's nearly 10% of all clergy nationwide, and over 20% of male clergy in the Republican zone.
And the methods were brutal.
Appallingly so, according to the detailed accounts. Hanged, drowned, suffocated, burned to death, or buried alive. Torture was described as shockingly sophisticated, mockery, blasphemy, forced nudity, beatings, cutting, skinning, mutilation, often with a morbid fixation on genitalia. Treated like animals, like pigs at the slaughterhouse or bulls in the bull ring, one account says. Corpses dragged through streets, publicly exposed, desecrated. Plus, countless priceless works of art destroyed, churches occupied, mock religious rituals performed. Just pure hatred and destruction aimed at faith itself.
So, understandably, the church hierarchy threw its weight behind Franco.
Increasingly, yes. Initially, Mola's plan might have kept church-state separation. But with Franco's own devout Catholicism and this massive religious revival in nationalist areas, the conflict became framed as a crusade by many supporters.
When did it become official church policy?
Bishop Oleza in Pamplona publicly called it a crusade in September 36. That term caught on. By July 37, almost the entire Spanish church hierarchy formally endorsed Franco in a public letter, saying his war followed Catholic principles. The Vatican appointed representatives to his regime.
So, for most Catholics in the nationalist zone, it was a religious war.
Payne says unequivocally yes. The Civil War turned into a war of religion for the Catholic majority. That spiritual, emotional commitment became the strongest single force behind Franco's cause. There were exceptions, divisions among Catholics in the Basque Country and Catalonia, but for the majority, it was profound.
And this religious persecution backfired on the Republicans internationally.
Hugely. While they won propaganda points portraying themselves as anti-fascist heroes, the anti-Catholic atrocities became their greatest single weakness in the struggle for world opinion. Catholic Ireland, for instance, was the only Western democracy openly supporting Franco, largely because of this.
And after the war, the church's position.
Restored to an even greater position than before, according to our sources. The bloodshed fueled a Catholic revival that lasted well into the 1950s. In 1987, the Vatican beatified 489 martyrs from the war, the largest single beatification ever. A massive, successful revival of traditional Christianity, unique in the 20th century West. Okay, so shifting back to the war itself. While the Republicans were fractured, the Nationalists managed to unify under Franco.
Largely, yes. It's a key contrast highlighted in the sources. The Spanish left was a mess of infighting, different ideologies. The rebels, or nationalists, mostly coalesced around Franco.
Even though he wasn't a typical charismatic leader. Short, squeaky voice.
Right. Not a Hitler or Mussolini figure in presence. But his appeal was different. Spain's Catholics felt abused by a hostile government. The nation was drifting to war. No clear leader emerged for their side until Franco stepped up.
How did he become the leader?
His Army of Africa was leading the charge. He secured the vital German and Italian aid. He turned a shaky rebellion into a seemingly viable counter-revolution that promised to undo, as his supporters saw it, a century of corrosive liberalism, leftism, and Freemasonry. He was a known quantity, a devout Catholic, a military professional. He became their savior.
And the different factions on the right, Carlists, monarchists, phalangists, they fell in line.
Mostly, yes. For the sake of unity against the common enemy, they accepted his leadership. Carlists kept their identity but subordinated themselves. Monarchists saw him as the best path to restoration. Disillusioned Ceuta youth joined the Phalange. They stuck together, mostly.
What about the Moroccan troops? How significant were they?
Very significant. Up to 80,000 Muslims served, about 8% of Franco's total force, and they took disproportionately heavy casualties. Franco, having served with them, managed Morocco well during the war.
Did the Republicans try to win them over, offer independence?
They did, but Stalin vetoed it. Apparently feared it would destabilize French Morocco and alienate potential Western support. So Franco kept their loyalty. Pay was decent for them, and he made sure Islam was respected, supported Mecca pilgrimages, framed it as a shared fight against Marxist atheism. So Franco's regime takes shape. How do the sources describe it?
Payne calls it uniquely Spanish, eclectic in composition. It adopted some fascistic credo, authoritarianism, national syndicalism, militarism, but wasn't a carbon copy. Franco stressed it had not assumed final form and would evolve. He wanted to avoid Primo de Rivera's mistake of not building a lasting system. Let's talk international meddling. Initially, the Republicans had more support. France.
Yes, France, under Léon Blum, the Popular Front, was a natural ally. Publicly, non-intervention, privately, massive aid. Loveday claims French intervention was probably more powerful than that of any other country. More French fighters than any other nationality. The border stayed open to arms and volunteers until mid-1938.
So France was intervening just as much as Italy or Germany, just sneakier about it.
That's the argument in our sources. Posing as non-interventionist while actively helping. The Soviets, France, Czechoslovakia supplied the Republicans so much that nationalists actually captured supply ships meant for them. But international media often downplayed this, focusing only on German-Italian aid to Franco. The propaganda war was intense.
So it wasn't just Germany and Italy helping Franco.
Not at all. The sources stress foreign troops didn't fight for Franco until after the communist-run international brigades arrived for the Republic. Even after the non-intervention committee was formed, Italy and France especially just kept sending aid.
And the Soviet Union's role grew.
Massively, to the point where some argue Republican Spain wasn't really sovereign in its foreign policy. Initially, the Soviets focused on fundraising and propaganda. Then came the international brigades. 41,000 volunteers recruited by the Comintern, modeled on foreign fighters in the Russian Revolution. How effective were the brigades?
Mixed. Anthony Beevor, often seen as pro-Republican, notes their appalling deficiencies. Many hadn't even held a rifle before heading to the front. Sheer courage, but often poorly trained. And internally, they suffered NKVD purges too. What prompted Stalin to send major military aid? Weapons, tanks.
Two things. confirmation the Republic would resist, and money. The Republicans offered their entire gold reserve, fourth biggest in the world, to Moscow in exchange for arms.
They gave their gold to Stalin.
Mid-October 36, yes. About $530 million worth shipped to Moscow, supposedly for arms, but sources suggest the Soviets charged exorbitant prices and profited hugely. This gold also bought Stalin invaluable positive PR, shifting the global view of the USSR from hell on earth to fighting fascism.
How many Soviet troops were actually fighting?
Not that many combat troops, maybe 3,000 max compared to Italy's 70,000. But their role was strategic. 800 aircrew, tank crews, high-ranking officers advising the People's Army, technical support, and crucially, the NKVD network.
The Soviet secret police, operating in Spain.
It's extensively. Training guerrillas, but also purging anti-Soviet foreigners and dissident Spanish Republicans like Andrew Nin of the PUM. They even had their own crematorium and ran a spy school in Spain. Deep, deep involvement. Eventually, Stalin's interest faded as Japan invaded China and arms shipments slowed.
So by late 37, the war stabilizes. Armies are roughly equal on paper, 700,000 each.
Roughly, yes. But the nationalists generally had the edge. Better advisor, sometimes. Germans, Italians versus Soviets. Less infighting, more competence, and critically, they could recruit more easily in conquered territories.
Like after taking the North.
Exactly. Captured 150,000 prisoners, deemed half fit to serve Franco, instantly boosting his numbers. There's a quote from a nationalist general joking, "Lucky for us that the Reds are worse." Sums up their view of Republican disorganization.
Let's recap those major campaigns Esther Madrid held. Franco turns north.
Right. The Northern Offensive, March to October 37. Resource-rich, industrial, largely nationalist sympathetic area anyway. Despite being outnumbered initially, Franco used concentrated force, artillery, air power effectively.
Bilbao falls.
June 5th. Massive blow to the Republic, 50,000 casualties. Mola dies in a plane crash then, solidifying Franco's sole command. Santander falls quickly in August. Asturias, site of the 34 revolt, resists harder but falls by October.
Why did the Republicans fail so badly in the north?
Payne blames confused and divided leadership. No coordination, inferior weapons. They sent 100 planes, but in small groups that got destroyed piecemeal. Losing the north was a strategic disaster of the first magnitude. Lost industry, lost 150,000 troops, many of whom ended up fighting for Franco. Huge shift in the balance of power. The Republicans tried their own offensive. Brunet.
July 37. Aimed to encircle Franco near Madrid. Had overwhelming superiority initially, broke through, then stalled. Horrible lack of initiative, fanatical nationalist defense. Franco counterattack shattered them, lost all gains. A fiasco. Seems like a pattern for Republican offensives.
Yeah. Bright start, failure to take advantage or coordinate, and then disaster. They tried to rebuild, conscripting 200,000 more, but couldn't replace lost equipment. Franco's troops were generally getting better trained and equipped by then.
Then to rule. Republicans take it, Franco insists on taking it back. December 37 to February 38. Republicans capture lightly defended Tyrol. Big morale boost for them. Franco, reportedly seeing himself as chosen by God, ignored German advice to hit Madrid and focused everything on retaking Tyrol. Massive counteroffensive eventually succeeded.
And immediately after retaking Tyrol,
Franco launches the Aragon Offensive, March 38. Just absolutely annihilated the Republicans. Devastating air attacks, mass desertions. By April 15th, nationalists reached the Mediterranean coast, splitting the Republic in two. Huge victory.
But then Franco makes that strange decision. Instead of hitting isolated Catalonia, he goes south towards Valencia.
Yeah, baffling to many. Reasons unclear: controlling citrus exports, fear of French intervention in Catalonia, Hitler maybe hinting he preferred the war prolonged. Whatever the reason, Catalonia got a breather, recovered somewhat, got more arms via the reopened French border.
So the Republic calls up more troops, tries one last big push, the Ebro.
Their last bolt. July 38. Battle of the Ebro. Biggest Republican offensive ever. Surprise attack across the river. Nationalists collapse initially. Republicans advance 20-40 kilometers, take 4,000 prisoners. But Franco reacts massively, cancels other plans, launches a gigantic counteroffensive, heavy casualties on both sides. Republicans fight stubbornly, heroics broadcast worldwide. But nationalist morale dips two endless battles, no knockout blow.
Franco plays politics during this Munich crisis.
Declares total neutrality, angers Hitler, but makes French intervention less likely. Smart move, perhaps. By mid-November, the Ebro battle is over. Republicans push back across the river, costly for both sides. Extremely. Franco lost over 6,000 dead, 50,000 injured. Republicans lost even more, maybe 20,000 prisoners alone. Franco's best units suffered, but the Republic's very best units were shattered. A grinding affair, but Franco came out massively on top. The Republic had truly shot its last bolt.
So the end is near. What were the underlying problems tearing the Republic apart from within? Payne summarizes them, right?
Yes. 4 main points, according to his analysis. First, the revolutionary extreme left, like the anarchists who cared more about social revolution than winning the war.
Again.
Basque and Catalan nationalists pursuing their own agendas, sometimes trying to make separate peace deals. Undermining unity. The Comintern and the Spanish Communist Party, PCE, backed by Moscow, trying to dominate everything under Prime Minister Negrin, alienating everyone else.
In the fourth.
Growing opposition from moderates left Republicans, socialists who wanted a negotiated peace and hated Negrin, and the communists' insistence on fighting to the bitter end. That disunity sounds impossible to manage in a civil war.
Exactly. Anarchists joining a government totally against their principles, diluting their cause. The Trotskyist PUM liquidated by Stalin's agents. Basque and Catalan governments acting almost independently, playing a deceptive triple game, as Payne calls it. It was a mess.
And after the Ebro defeat, things really fell apart.
Completely. Even with maybe 500,000 men still technically in the army. The economy was destroyed, hyperinflation, famine looming, fear of the communists faded, open dissent erupted, the PCE denounced traitors, other socialists abandoned the Popular Front. So Negrin and the communists wanted to fight on, everyone else wanted out.
Pretty much. Seeing Negrin making no move to end the war, the other factions, socialists, anarchists, left Republicans backed a military coup led by Colonel Casado, commander of the Central Front.
Another military revolt, this time against the communists.
Exactly. Casado thought he, as a military man, could negotiate with Franco. By this point, many on the left were almost as anti-communist as they were anti-Franco. They just wanted the suffering to end.
How did Casado's revolt go?
Bitter fighting in Madrid for several days in early March 39. Casado won. Negrin, the top communists, the Soviet advisors, they all fled the country. With that internal opposition gone, the remaining Republican defense just crumbled. And Franco launches his final offensive.
The Offensive of Victory, March 26th. It was mostly a walkover. Madrid was spared a final bloodbath through negotiation. April 1st, 1939, the war officially ends.
And the victory celebrations must have been intense.
Oh, absolutely huge. The sources describe a gigantic victory parade in Madrid on May 19th, 120,000 soldiers. Franco guarded by his Moroccan cavalry, followed by legionnaires, Phalangists, Carlists, Italians, Portuguese volunteers, the German Condor Legion. What was the atmosphere like?
Streets covered in Catholic symbols, nationalist flags, huge crowds, women overcome with happiness and crying their eyes out, men giving the nationalist salute, deep gratitude towards Franco and the army. Any specific accounts?
Colonel Richthofen of the Condor Legion wrote in his diary about the crowds yelling, "Viva Alemania, long live Germany," planes overhead forming "Viva Franco." Anthony Beevor describes the religious procession the next day, Cardinal Goma giving Franco the cross to kiss, Franco laying his sword before the Christ of Lepanto statue. Deeply medieval, symbolic imagery.
So for the victors, it wasn't just winning a war.
No, it was much more profound. Beevor notes Franco was seen as fighting against the past as well as the present, against 19th century liberalism, 18th century Enlightenment Freemasonry, even 17th century defeats. It was framed as a spiritual triumph. Jesus Christ over Karl Marx.
That's the powerful summary offered. Jesus Christ had triumphed over Karl Marx. Catholicism had triumphed over the combined might of communism, anarchism, socialism, liberalism, and corrupt democracy. The Spanish people, in the nationalist view, had beaten the Soviet Union.
But the end of the fighting wasn't the end of the suffering. What about the prisoners?
No, definitely not.
Yeah.
Countless Republican prisoners now faced Franco's justice. The Red Terror, from the nationalist viewpoint, had failed and only hardened their opponents. Now, as the sources state, the nationalists would take their revenge. A dark chapter was beginning, even as the fighting stopped.
So, wrapping this deep dive up, what does it all mean? We've peeled back so many layers today.
It really shows the Spanish Civil War wasn't simple, not black and white at all. It was this perfect storm of long-term decline, deep ideological hatreds, ruthless politics, and absolutely horrifying religious persecution, as detailed in these sources.
And those themes, tradition versus modernity, faith versus atheism, order versus chaos, they still feel relevant, don't they?
Absolutely. They show how powerful deeply held beliefs are, how they shape nations, and the terrible cost when those beliefs become utterly irreconcilable.
It was a real testing ground for 20th century ideologies and even new ways of warfare.
Definitely. A crucible. It left Spain shattered, deeply divided, trying to figure out its future after tearing itself apart over its past. It's a stark reminder of how these fundamental divisions can play out.
So, a final thought for you, the listener. We've seen how complex this was, how rooted in history, how shaped by belief. As societies today continue to wrestle with similar divides, differing visions for the future, clashes over values, what lessons can you draw from Spain's profound and tragic struggle? How does understanding this conflict maybe change your perspective on the challenges we face now? Something to think about.